First they let his daughter die. Then, to silence him, the hospital's CO leaked her private deathbed photos to the world, calling him a liar. They thought they had destroyed him, but they had just armed a billionaire for war. Welcome to Whispers of the Criminal Mind. Before we unravel this incredible story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happens next. The air in the emergency room at Bridgeview Medical Center was a thick, chaotic soup of antiseptic, anxiety, and the distant, rhythmic beep of machines keeping people alive. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile, unforgiving glare on the scuffed linoleum floors and the rows of plastic chairs filled with the sick and the suffering. It was a place where time seemed to warp, stretching into an agonizing crawl for those who waited and flying by for the staff who rushed past in a blur of blue scrubs. For 16-year-old Leah Harris, every tick of the institutional clock on the wall felt like a hammer blow against her heart. Her brother Leo was a dead weight in her arms. At 5 years old, he should have been a bundle of wiry energy, but now he was limp, his small body radiating a terrifying heat that soaked through her thin jacket. His breaths were shallow, ragged things, each one a tiny, desperate gasp for air that seemed to catch in his throat. His dark curls were plastered to his forehead with sweat, and his eyes, when he managed to open them, were glassy and unfocused. 3 days ago their mother had said it was just a simple flu. Yesterday it was a bad one. Today, it was a waking nightmare, and Leah was alone, navigating this fluorescent-lit hell while their mom was at a job interview she couldn't afford to miss. The triage desk was a fortress of glass and steel, an imposing barrier designed to manage the flood of human misery. Behind it sat Patrice Holland, a woman whose expression was as starched and uncreased as her uniform. She didn't look at the sick child in Leah's arms. Her eyes were fixed on the glowing monitor in front of her, her fingers tapping rhythmically on the keyboard. "Insurance card," Patrice said, her voice a flat monotone that cut through the surrounding noise. It wasn't a question, it was a command. We don't have it right now," Leah stammered, shifting Leo's weight. He let out a weak, rattling cough that shook his entire frame. "My mom, she just lost her job and the coverage lapsed at the start of the month. She's trying to get it sorted out, but he's really sick. Please, he can't breathe right." Patrice's fingers stopped typing, but she still didn't look up. "Hospital policy requires a valid insurance card or a deposit for services." She gestured with a pen toward a small, laminated sign taped to the glass. The sign was a maze of corporate-approved text, but the message was brutally clear. Leah's voice cracked with a desperation she couldn't control. "A deposit? I don't have any money. My mom will be here as soon as she can. Can't you just see him? Look at him." For the first time, Patrice's gaze lifted from the screen. It wasn't a look of sympathy or concern, but one of mild annoyance, as if Leah were a problem in her queue to be processed and dismissed. Her eyes flickered over Leo for less than a second before returning to the screen. The brief, clinical glance was worse than being ignored. It was an assessment that had concluded he wasn't her problem. "There is a free clinic on Elm Street," Patrice said, her voice returning to its robotic cadence as she resumed typing. "They open tomorrow morning at 8. You can take him there." Tomorrow morning. The words echoed in Leah's head, nonsensical and cruel. Leo was struggling for air now. His small chest was working so hard, the skin sucking in around his ribs with every painful breath. Tomorrow might as well be a lifetime away. She could feel the systemic indifference closing in around her, a cold, invisible wall far more solid than the glass partition separating her from help. It was in the hum of the lights, the impassive face of the receptionist, the very air of the building that was supposed to be a place of healing. This place wasn't built to heal people like them. It was built to process payments. Tears of pure rage and terror pricked at Leah's eyes. "Please," she whispered, her voice raw. "He's just a little boy. Are you really going to let him die because we don't have the right piece of plastic?" The accusation hung in the air, but it didn't seem to land. Patrice Holland was protected by the armor of her protocol. She had a response for this, a line in a script she had no doubt recited hundreds of times. She finally swiveled in her chair, her expression hardening into a mask of finality. She was done with this conversation. She was done with them. Her words were calm, measured, and utterly devastating, each one a brick in the cold wall that stood between her brother and a chance to live. "I'm sorry," she said, and the apology was the most insulting part, a hollow gesture devoid of any human feeling. But we cannot treat him without the proper arrangements. Across the waiting room, shrouded in the self-imposed anonymity of a simple gray hoodie and jeans, sat Caleb Vance. To the casual observer, he was just another worried face in the crowd. In reality, he was the ghost haunting this hospital, a man whose grief had been meticulously forged into a weapon over 2 long years. The crisp and signed $15 million donation agreement in his jacket pocket was not an act of philanthropy. It was the final elegant twist of the knife in his protracted revenge against Dr. Alistair Finch and the institution that had murdered his daughter. He was here to buy a seat at the table, to get close enough to the heart of Bridgeview to watch it die from the inside. Then he saw the girl. He saw her shoulders tremble under the weight of the small boy in her arms. He heard the desperate crack in her voice as she pleaded with the woman behind the glass. And he saw the woman. Patrice Holland. The name was a scar on his memory, the face a permanent fixture in his nightmares. Suddenly, the chaotic year faded into a muted hum, and Caleb was no longer in the present. He was 2 years in the past, standing in this exact spot, his hand gripping his wife's so tightly their bones ached. Their daughter Lily was fighting for every breath, a high-pitched, wheezing sound that was the soundtrack to their world ending. She had the same fever, the same glassy eyes, the same terrifying lethargy as the little boy now gasping for air. And behind the glass sat the same Patrice Holland, her expression just as impassive, her fingers tapping out the same rhythm of indifference on her keyboard. "I understand you're upset, Mr. Vance," she had said, her voice a placid stream of condescending protocol, "but we have procedures. We need to verify your insurance before we can admit her." He remembered shouting, his voice raw with a panic he didn't know he was capable of. He remembered his wife sobbing, begging. He remembered offering his credit card, his watch, anything to cut through the red tape that was strangling his child. But Patrice Holland was immovable, a gatekeeper guarding a temple of bureaucracy. Lily had been a liability to be processed, not a child to be saved. The fatal delay, 47 minutes he'd counted every second, was masked by the polite, meaningless language of hospital policy. By the time a doctor finally saw her, it was too late. The paperwork was in order, but his daughter was gone. Now, watching Leah Harris face that same cold wall, Caleb felt the carefully constructed ice around his heart crack. His plan for a slow, methodical revenge suddenly felt hollow, a pointless intellectual exercise. Revenge wouldn't save this boy. Revenge wouldn't undo the past. He saw his wife's desperate face mirrored in Leah's. He heard Lily's struggling breaths and Leo's weak, rattling cough. This wasn't an echo of the past, it was a repetition. The system hadn't changed. It was still here, still chewing up the vulnerable and spitting them out. Something inside him snapped. The cold, calculated billionaire receded, and the grieving father took over. He stood up, his movements fluid and purposeful. He pulled down his hood, and a few people in the waiting room who recognized the reclusive titan of Van Corp did a subtle double-take. He ignored them. His focus was a laser beam aimed at the triage desk. He didn't run. He crossed the scuffed linoleum floor in 10 long, deliberate strides, his presence radiating an intensity that made the surrounding chaos seem to pause and hold its breath. He came to a stop beside Leah, a silent, imposing figure of support. Patrice Holland looked up, her practiced composure faltering as she recognized the man whose daughter had died on her watch. Caleb Vance didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His words were quiet, laced with the chilling authority of a man who could buy and sell the entire building without checking his bank balance. They were clear, precise, and absolute. "This boy gets a doctor now," he said, his gaze locking with Patrice's. "Or Bridgeview won't have a donor tomorrow." The threat was unmistakable. The $15 million donation, the one Dr. Finch had been crowing about for months, was now hanging by a thread. For the first time, a flicker of panic appeared in Patrice Holland's eyes. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers suddenly clumsy. A moment later, a pair of nurses burst through the swinging doors, their expressions urgent. They gently took Leo from Leah's trembling arms, placed him on a gurney, and disappeared into the trauma bay. Leah stared, stunned into silence, at the spot where her brother had been. Then she looked up at the stranger beside her, this man who had shattered the wall with a single sentence. Their eyes met, and in that shared moment of desperation, grief, and a newfound, fragile hope, an unlikely and unspoken alliance was forged. In the sterile quiet of the pediatric ICU, the only sounds were the gentle hiss of an oxygen machine and the steady, reassuring beep of Leo's heart monitor. A doctor, a kind woman with tired eyes, explained the situation to Leah and her mother, Maria, who had rushed to the hospital the moment she'd gotten the call. "It's critical bacterial pneumonia," the doctor said, her voice low. His oxygen levels were dangerously low when he came in. "The team in the ER stabilized him, but I need you to understand how serious this was. A few more hours? Well, you got him here just in time." Maria Harris squeezed her eyes shut, a silent wave of gratitude and terror washing over her. She looked at her son, so small and pale in the oversized hospital bed, a network of tubes and wires connecting him to the machines that were keeping him alive. They had almost lost him. The thought was a physical blow. Miles away, on the top floor of Bridgeview's administrative tower, Dr. Alastair Finch was not thinking about the child in the ICU. He was staring out his panoramic window at the Boston skyline, his knuckles white as he gripped his phone. On the other end of the line was his head of development, delivering the news he had been dreading. "Vance has put the donation on indefinite hold," the man stammered. "He said he's re-evaluating his relationship with the hospital, pending a full review of this evening's incident." Finch ended the call without a word. Incident. They were calling it an incident. He saw it for what it was. A public relations catastrophe orchestrated by a billionaire with a god complex and a 16-year-old girl with a loud mouth. $15 million, the centerpiece of his legacy, the funding for the Finch Research Pavilion, was evaporating because a receptionist had followed protocol. His office was a testament to his success. Mahogany desk, leather chairs, abstract art that cost more than a nurse's annual salary. He had built this hospital's reputation, curated its image as a beacon of elite medical care. And he would not let it be torn down by a poor, negligent family and a grieving, unstable benefactor. He buzzed his legal counsel. "Get in here. We have a narrative to control." A few minutes later, a sharp-suited lawyer listened as Finch laid out his strategy. "The best defense is a strong offense," Finch said, his voice cold and precise. "This family let their child get critically ill. The mother was nowhere to be found. The girl caused a public disturbance. Before Vance can paint them as martyrs, we will define them as what they are: negligent, unfit." He picked up his phone and dialed a private number for a contact he kept for just such occasions, a man who knew how to phrase an anonymous tip. Finch dictated the key phrases, twisting the facts into a weapon. Child arrived in a state of extreme medical neglect, delay in seeking care measured in days. Mother was absent at the time of admission. Serious concerns about the home environment. He hung up, a grim satisfaction settling over him. He wasn't just managing a problem, he was crushing it before it could grow. The next afternoon, the systems attack landed on the Harris family's front door. Maria, already frayed from a sleepless night at the hospital, opened the door to a stern-faced woman in a drab blazer who introduced herself as being from Child Protective Services. The woman's questions were a barrage of veiled accusations. "Why did you wait 3 days to seek medical attention for your son, Ms. Harris? Can you explain your current employment situation? Is it common for your 16-year-old daughter to be the primary caregiver?" The small, tidy apartment suddenly felt like a cage. Every family photo, every worn piece of furniture, every sign of their financial struggle was being judged as evidence of her failure. Maria's overwhelming fear for her son's health was now compounded by a new, more insidious terror. They could take her children. They could actually take her children away. 2 days later, the hospital made its final move. Maria and Leah were summoned to a sterile conference room. A hospital lawyer, radiating expensive perfume and predatory confidence, slid a folder across the table. "Dr. Finch was so moved by your family's difficult situation," the lawyer began, her smile perfectly polished and utterly fake. "Bridgeview would like to extend its compassion by forgiving the entirety of Leo's medical bills." She paused for effect. "Furthermore, as an acknowledgement of the stress you've been under, we'd like to offer an additional $10,000 to help you get back on your feet." Maria stared at the papers, her mind reeling. No bills? $10,000? It was a lifeline she couldn't have imagined. "You just have to sign here," the lawyer said, pointing to the last page. "It's a standard confidentiality agreement. It just ensures that the hospital's generosity remains a private matter between us." "Hush money." The realization hit Leah like a punch to the gut. This wasn't compassion, it was a transaction. They were being paid to disappear, to bury the truth of what happened in that emergency room. They wanted to buy their silence, to erase the fact that the hospital's cold, calculated policies had nearly killed her brother. It was a threat wrapped in the language of charity. The man behind it all, Dr. Finch, wasn't just trying to protect his hospital. He was trying to prove that his system was right. A system where a child's life is weighed against the cost of their treatment, where protocol matters more than a pulse. A system that would rather crush a struggling family than admit it was wrong. Dr. Finch believes a family's bank account is more important than a child's health. He's using his power to bully a terrified mother and her kids. If you think every child deserves a chance to live, hit that subscribe button. Only people who agree with Finch's heartless system won't. Caleb Vance met Maria and Leah in a quiet, private waiting room he'd arranged near the pediatric ICU. The settlement offer lay on the table between them, a white flag that felt more like a landmine. Maria stared at the document, the promise of $10,000 and an end to the CPS nightmare warring with the raw injustice of their situation. It was a devil's bargain, a lifeline that would cost them their dignity. They want to pay us to say none of this ever happened, Leah said, her voice tight with a cold fury that seemed far older than her 16 years. They want us to pretend Leo wasn't dying while that woman was suggesting a clinic that opened the next day. Leah, what choice do we have? Maria whispered, her exhaustion evident in the slump of her shoulders. They have lawyers. They have CPS. They can ruin us. This money could be a fresh start. Caleb listened, his expression unreadable. He understood Maria's fear. He knew the crushing weight of a system designed to keep people like her powerless. But he also saw the unyielding fire in her daughter's eyes. They're counting on you feeling that way, Maria, Caleb said softly. They're betting that your fear is stronger than your anger. He then turned his full attention to Leah. But I don't think they've factored you into their equation. Leah met his gaze, a silent understanding passing between them. She reached into her worn backpack and pulled out her phone. Her hands were steady as she navigated to a folder hidden deep within her files, its name a simple, defiant word, Bridgeview. This isn't just about what happened to Leo, she said, her voice gaining strength. They've been doing this for a long time. She pressed play. The video was shaky, filmed discreetly from her lap, but the audio was brutally clear. It showed an elderly man, his face pale with pain, leaning heavily on the triage desk. My arm. I think it's broken, the man rasped. Patrice Holland's voice, the same flat monotone, cut through his words. Do you have an insurance card, sir? Leah swiped to another video. A young mother, a baby wheezing in her arms. He has RSV, the pediatrician said to come straight here. Patrice's voice again. We'll need a deposit before we can admit him. Another and another. A construction worker in a dusty shirt holding a blood-soaked rag to his hand. A woman describing chest pains that radiated down her arm. Each one met with the same cold, procedural wall. The same questions about money, not medicine. The same suggestions of other clinics, other times. It was a horrifying, monotonous litany of institutional cruelty. Caleb watched, a storm gathering in his eyes. This wasn't just a single failure. This was a protocol. A hunt. A system designed to weed out the unprofitable. He looked at Leah, no longer seeing just a scared teenager, but a guerrilla journalist, a quiet warrior who had been gathering evidence while no one was watching. This changes everything, he said, his voice low and intense. This isn't just your story against theirs anymore. This is proof. He looked at Maria. That settlement is a trap. Don't sign it. We're going to fight them, and with this, we are going to win. The next day, Caleb's corporate attorneys, a team of legal assassins accustomed to billion-dollar mergers, descended on the problem with surgical precision. They treated Leah's phone like a priceless artifact, creating secure, verified copies of the recordings. Her videos were their roadmap. We need someone on the inside, their lead counsel, a sharp woman named Alani, stated in a briefing. Someone who can connect these individual acts of negligence to a hospital-wide policy. Someone who was there. They cross-referenced the dates and times of Leah's recordings with Bridgeview's ER staff schedules. One name kept appearing, Dr. Eris Thorne. A brilliant, respected physician with a spotless record, but whose online footprint hinted at a growing disillusionment with the American healthcare system. He was their target. Alani approached him not in his office, but in a quiet coffee shop miles from the hospital. She didn't lead with accusations. She simply slid a tablet across the table, playing one of Leah's videos, the one with the wheezing baby. Dr. Thorne watched, his face hardening. He remembered that night. He remembered being told by a floor manager that the ER was at capacity, that they were diverting non-urgent cases. He never saw that child. He never knew why. Now, seeing the mother turned away over a deposit, the truth hit him with the force of a physical blow. The lie he'd been telling himself, that these were isolated administrative decisions, crumbled into dust. That night, he sat in his study, staring at a picture of his own daughter, lost to an asthma attack a decade earlier after a different ER had made them wait too long. He had become part of the very system that had failed him. The following evening, he met Caleb Vance in the back of a dimly lit restaurant. The fear was palpable in his voice. "Do you know what they'll do to me?" he asked, his hands trembling slightly. "They'll strip my license. I'll lose everything. My career, my reputation. It will all be gone." "I know," Caleb said simply. "And I can't promise you they won't try. But I can promise you this. We will not let them bury what you know. We will not let them silence you." Dr. Thorne looked away, his gaze distant. He thought of the faces in Leah's videos, the ghosts of patients he was never allowed to treat. He thought of his own daughter. His decision was made. He went back to his office late that night, the hospital corridors eerily quiet. With the door locked, he logged into the hospital's internal server. His fingers flew across the keyboard, accessing encrypted departmental emails and financial planning memos. The language was all sanitized corporate speak: patient flow optimization, revenue cycle enhancement, pre-care financial counseling, but the message was clear. It was a detailed, calculated, unwritten policy, championed by Dr. Finch himself, to boost profits by systematically discouraging, delaying, and deflecting patients without top-tier insurance. He downloaded everything onto a secure flash drive. As he dragged the last file, he felt a profound sense of terror, but also, for the first time in years, a sense of relief. He handed the drive to Alani the next morning, the small piece of plastic feeling impossibly heavy in his hand. He had just detonated his own life, but he had also armed them with the weapon they needed to bring the entire corrupt edifice of Bridgeview crashing down. Dr. Alistair Finch sat in his office, the picture of calm, but inside, a cold fury was building. His legal team had just delivered the news. The Harris family hadn't just rejected the settlement, they had lawyered up. Not with some storefront personal injury attorney, but with the corporate sharks from Alani and Croft, the firm that handled Caleb Vance's multi-billion-dollar acquisitions. Worse, his sources confirmed that a respected physician, Dr. Eris Thorne, had gone rogue, likely feeding them information from the inside. Finch realized his critical error. He had treated this like a routine risk management issue, a small fire to be smothered with a modest payout. He had underestimated the girl, and he had catastrophically underestimated the billionaire. Caleb Vance wasn't just a donor. He was an adversary, and he was coming for him with the full weight of his fortune and influence. A direct legal battle was a war of attrition Finch couldn't win. Vance could bury the hospital in litigation for a decade without feeling a financial pinch. Finch needed a different kind of weapon. He couldn't attack Caleb's wealth, but he could attack the man himself. He could attack his mind. The strategy formed in his mind, elegant in its cruelty. If you can't defeat the king, convince the world he's gone mad. Finch picked up his phone and called a number saved under the discreet name Lighthouse. He was calling a high-end public relations firm that specialized in narrative management, a polite term for sophisticated character assassination. "I have a situation that requires a delicate touch," Finch began. "A prominent public figure is acting erratically. There are concerns for his well-being. He's become obsessed with my institution, stemming from a past family tragedy." He spent the next hour carefully crafting the story, feeding the PR firm a series of half-truths and insidious suggestions. He painted Caleb as a Howard Hughes-like recluse, a brilliant mind fractured by grief. He spoke of his unfounded vendetta and paranoid accusations. He never raised his voice. He sounded like a man burdened by a sad, unfortunate duty. The first tremor hit the next morning. An article appeared on Market Pulse, an influential financial blog read by every major player on Wall Street. The headline was subtle but devastating: "Grief and Governance. concerns mount over Vancorp CEO's personal crusade. The article, citing sources close to the Bridgeview board, detailed Caleb's increasingly erratic behavior and his unhealthy fixation on the hospital where his daughter had tragically passed away 2 years prior. It questioned whether a man so consumed by a personal vendetta could effectively lead a multi-billion-dollar tech empire. The piece was a masterpiece of insinuation, dripping with feigned sympathy while planting seeds of profound doubt. By midday, the narrative had gone viral. Mainstream news outlets, smelling blood in the water, picked up the story. Financial news channels convened panels of experts to discuss the stability of Vancorp's leadership. A primetime host looked gravely into the camera and said, "While our hearts go out to Mr. Vance for his loss, investors have a right to ask if his personal demons are now putting their portfolios at risk." Finch couldn't bully a teenager, so now he's trying to ruin a grieving father by calling him crazy and unstable. If you can't stand manipulators who attack people at their lowest, smash that like button. Let's show the Finches of the world we won't be silenced. The market, which runs on perception and fear, reacted instantly. Vancorp's stock, a titan of the tech industry, began to slide. First by a few points, then by a dozen. Panicked investors started selling off their shares. The slide became a freefall. Caleb Vance watched the carnage from his minimalist office overlooking the city. A ticker on his screen glowed with sickening red numbers. By the time the closing bell rang on Wall Street, Vancorp had lost 15% of its value. Over $1 billion of his personal net worth had vanished into thin air in less than 8 hours. His board members were flooding his phone with frantic calls. But the financial loss, staggering as it was not what truly wounded him. It was the violation. Finch had taken the most sacred, painful part of his life, the death of his daughter, the grief that was a constant, low hum beneath the surface of his every moment, and had twisted it into a weapon. He was being publicly diagnosed by his enemy. His pain used to frame him as a lunatic. He looked at a small silver-framed photo on his desk. It was Lily, age 7, a mischievous grin on her face, a gap where a tooth used to be. The world was now being told that his love for her, the profound ache of her absence, was a form of madness. Finch had successfully shifted the battlefield. This was no longer about a sick child in an emergency room or a grieving father seeking justice. It was about the sanity of Caleb Vance. The fight had become a direct assault on his empire, his reputation, and his very mind. The stakes had just escalated from a battle for the soul of a hospital to a war for his own. And Finch, with cold, surgical precision, had just won the first round. The character assassination had been brutally effective, but Dr. Alastair Finch knew it was only a temporary victory. The Vancorp stock would eventually stabilize. Caleb Vance, though wounded, was not the type to retreat. His legal team was still digging, and Dr. Thorne was a ticking time bomb. Finch needed a final, decisive blow, a move so scorched earth that it would not just discredit Caleb, but utterly break his will to fight. He found his weapon late one night, deep within the hospital's encrypted digital archives. Accessing the file required overriding multiple security alerts, each one a digital whisper of the ethical line he was about to cross. He ignored them. He typed in the name, Vance Lily. Her entire short life, condensed into clinical data, filled his screen. He scrolled past diagnoses and treatment logs until he found the attached media files. They were high-resolution images, taken by a nurse in the pediatric ICU for the official record. They were never meant to be seen by anyone outside the medical team and the grieving family. They were sacred. He saw Lily, small and fragile in the hospital bed, an oxygen mask fogging with each shallow breath. He saw the 4 lines taped to her tiny hand. He saw the exhaustion and fear in her eyes. Finch felt nothing. He was not looking at a child, he was looking at an asset. He downloaded the most heart-wrenching images. But the photos alone weren't enough. He needed to poison them with a narrative. He spent an hour drafting a document, a forged independent medical analysis. He twisted every detail. The oxygen mask became a standard precautionary measure. Her documented respiratory distress was reframed as symptoms consistent with a common, mild bronchial infection. The entire report was a clinical masterpiece of gaslighting, designed to paint Lily's tragic death as a routine illness that her unstable father had magnified into a catastrophe for his own manipulative purposes. He packaged the photos and the forged analysis into an encrypted file. He then sent it from an anonymous, untraceable email address to the tip line of BuzzFlash, a notorious online tabloid that prioritized clicks over ethics. The subject line was simple: the truth about the grieving billionaire. Finch just used a dead child's memory to save his own skin. It's a disgusting, unforgivable low. Comment justice for Lily below if you're not on the side of monsters like Alastair Finch. Caleb Vance was in his stark, silent office when the alert came through. It wasn't from the news or his legal team. It was a text from his sister containing only a link in 3 words: "Caleb, don't look." Of course he did. He clicked the link and his world tilted on its axis. The tabloid's headline screamed in garish yellow font: "Billionaire's big lie. Photos suggest daughter's tragedy was a minor flu." And there she was, his Lily. Her face, pale and vulnerable, was plastered across his screen. The images were intimate, agonizing moments he had thought were locked away forever, now on public display for the world to gawk at, to dissect, to judge. A wave of nausea washed over him. He felt a profound sense of violation, as if Finch had broken into his home and desecrated her memory on the living room wall. Then he read the article. He read the clinical, dismissive lies of the expert analysis. He saw his daughter's desperate fight for life reframed as a minor inconvenience, his all-consuming grief painted as a cynical fabrication. This was Finch's checkmate. He hadn't just attacked Caleb's company or his sanity. He had attacked the very core of his pain, the foundation of his entire crusade. He had taken the most sacred memory of his life and turned it into a grotesque public spectacle. In that moment, staring at his daughter's face being used as a weapon against him, Caleb felt something he hadn't felt since the day she died: utter and complete defeat. Their case, built on the truth of the hospital's negligence, had just been vaporized by a lie so monstrous it felt indestructible. He was no longer a grieving father seeking justice. To the world he was now a manipulative monster. For a few agonizing hours, it felt as if Alastair Finch's despicable gambit had worked. Caleb Vance was adrift in a sea of shock and revulsion, the desecrated images of his daughter burning behind his eyes. But then something shifted. Finch, in his arrogance, had made a fatal miscalculation. He had underestimated the public's humanity. The initial shock from the tabloid story gave way to a digital wildfire of outrage. The photos, intended to portray Lily's illness as minor, had the opposite effect. People didn't see a mild bronchial infection. They saw a sick little girl fighting for her life. Pediatricians and ER nurses took to social media, their professional fury uncontainable. On Twitter, a respected Boston Children's Hospital doctor posted a thread, circling the clear signs of respiratory distress in the photos and labeling the tabloid's expert analysis as dangerous, unethical malpractice. Mothers' groups on Facebook organized a boycott of Bridgeview's corporate sponsors. The tabloid's comment section, usually a cesspool of negativity, became a memorial, flooded with messages of support for Caleb and condemnation for the soulless ghoul who had leaked the images. Finch hadn't created a smear campaign. He had created a martyr. The story was no longer about a crazy billionaire. It was about a grieving father being tormented by a soulless institution. The backfire was spectacular and absolute. In his office, watching the tsunami of public support roll in, Caleb felt the ice of his despair begin to thaw. The profound ache in his chest hadn't vanished. It had superheated, solidifying from a formless grief into something hard and sharp: purpose. Finch had crossed a line from which there was no return. He had tried to use Lily as a weapon and in doing so, had handed Caleb the one thing he needed most: a righteous, unquenchable fire. The time for measured legal maneuvering was over. He called his lead attorney, Alani. "Cancel all my meetings," he said, his voice devoid of its earlier brokenness, now replaced with a chilling calm. "And clear your team's schedule for the night. I want an emergency meeting with the entire Bridgeview Board of Directors tomorrow at 9 a.m. Tell them I'm coming to discuss a final resolution." That night, the conference room at Vancorp headquarters transformed into a war room. The air was thick with the smell of coffee and focused intensity. It wasn't a legal strategy session. It was the meticulous construction of a trial. Leah was there, her phone connected to a forensic drive, its video files now treated with the reverence of a sacred text. Dr. Eris Thorne sat at the table, his face etched with exhaustion and resolve, walking the legal team through the hospital's internal data, explaining how financial incentives directly translated into delayed care. Caleb stood before a massive whiteboard, orchestrating the flow of the presentation. He wasn't just a client anymore, he was the lead prosecutor. He and his team worked tirelessly, not just compiling facts, but weaving them into an inescapable narrative of corruption. They sequenced Leah's heartbreaking videos with Dr. Thorne's damning internal emails. They cross-referenced Patrice Holland's shift logs with the hospital's own mortality statistics. They created a timeline that showed, with irrefutable clarity, how Dr. Finch's profit-driven policies had directly led to patient deaths, culminating in the criminal alteration of Lily Vance's medical records. The presentation wasn't a plea for sympathy or a request for negotiation. It was a verdict, meticulously researched and ready to be delivered. Each slide was a nail being hammered into Alastair Finch's professional coffin. As dawn broke over the city, casting long shadows across the littered conference table, the final presentation was loaded onto a secure tablet. They were ready. Caleb looked at the small, determined team assembled around him. A fierce teenager who had dared to hit record, a doctor who had sacrificed his career for his conscience, and a team of lawyers armed with the truth. He wanted a war, Caleb said quietly, picking up the tablet. Let's go give him one. They weren't walking into that boardroom to ask for justice. They were walking in to deliver it. The boardroom at Bridgeview Medical Center was a temple of corporate power, all polished mahogany, supple leather, and floor-to-ceiling windows offering a god's-eye view of Boston. The 15 members of the board of directors sat around the massive table, their expressions a mixture of anxiety and impatience. At the head of the table sat Dr. Alastair Finch, the picture of composed authority. The public relations storm from the leaked photos had been a tempest, but he believed he had weathered it. He greeted Caleb Vance not as an adversary, but as a problem to be managed, his face a mask of practiced, condescending sympathy. Caleb, he began, his voice smooth as silk. We are all deeply sorry for your loss, and for the unfortunate public spectacle this has become. We are prepared to discuss a generous philanthropic gesture in your daughter's name to put this matter to rest. Caleb didn't take the offered seat. He walked to the head of the room and connected a tablet to the room's massive presentation screen. I'm not here for a gesture, Alastair, he said, his voice level and cold. I'm here for a reckoning. The screen flickered to life, not with charts or graphs, but with the grainy, shaky video from Leah Harris's phone. The boardroom was filled with the sound of a sick man pleading for help for his broken arm, followed by the flat, dismissive voice of Patrice Holland asking for his insurance card. Caleb let the video play out, then switched to the next. A young mother, her baby wheezing, being told about the deposit policy. Then another. And another. The videos were raw, undeniable proof of a systemic cruelty. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their expensive chairs, their gazes dropping from the screen to the polished table. Finch, however, remained unfazed. Tragic, he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. But what this shows are isolated incidents. One overzealous employee misinterpreting hospital policy. A personnel matter we are already addressing. Leah's phone held the truth Finch tried to bury for years. If you believe in the power of one person to expose corruption, hit subscribe now. People who want the truth to stay hidden won't. Let's talk about that policy, Caleb said, clicking to the next slide. The screen was now filled with cold, hard data from Dr. Eris Thorne. A line graph showed the average ER wait times, starkly stratified by insurance provider. Patients with top-tier PPO plans were seen in an average of 17 minutes. Those on Medicaid waited an average of 98 minutes. The uninsured? 184 minutes, if they were seen at all. This isn't an employee, Alastair. This is an algorithm, Caleb stated, his voice ringing with authority. He brought up internal emails, their senders redacted for the moment. They were filled with sanitized corporate jargon, minimizing non-reimbursable encounters, optimizing revenue streams at point of entry, but their meaning was brutally clear. This wasn't a mistake, it was a business model. A board member, a stout man with a flushed face, cleared his throat. This data lacks context. It could mean anything. Then let me give you some context, Caleb said, his voice dropping an octave. The screen changed again. On the left was a copy of Lily Vance's original intake chart, the text highlighting phrases like severe respiratory distress, cyanosis, and audible stridor. On the right was the version created 3 days after her death. The damning phrases were gone, replaced with mild bronchial infection and moderate discomfort. At the bottom of the altered document, a digital signature glowed like a fresh wound. Finch. This is a forgery. Finch roared, leaping to his feet. A pathetic, transparent fabrication by a grieving, unstable man. You dare bring this garbage in here? He turned to the board, his voice ringing with manufactured outrage. This is a vendetta, plain and simple. He's using his grief to attack us. Just as Finch's performance reached its crescendo, the heavy boardroom doors swung open. Alani, Caleb's lawyer, stood in the doorway. And behind her, pale and visibly trembling, was Patrice Holland. The room fell into a stunned silence. Finch stared, his mouth agape, as Alani gently guided the former receptionist to a chair at the table. "Ms. Holland," Alani began, her voice calm and steady, "could you please tell the board about the policy known as financial triage at Bridgeview?" Patrice wrung her hands, her gaze fixed on the table. "It wasn't a written policy," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "It was an understanding. We were trained in staff meetings to manage patient flow. We were told to prioritize patients with verified insurance to keep the ER from getting overcrowded with unprofitable encounters." She took a shaky breath. "We were instructed to use delays to emphasize the costs, to suggest other facilities. We were told to discourage them from being admitted unless it was a life-or-death situation right there at the desk." "And who gave these instructions?" Alani asked. Patrice finally lifted her head, her eyes locking with the CEO's. "The instructions came from administration. Dr. Finch led several of those meetings himself. He said our performance reviews would depend on how well we managed the financial profile of the patient queue. Even Patrice, the receptionist who first turned them away, couldn't live with the guilt. That's the power of conscience. If you agree that doing the right thing always matters, like this video, let's send a message that integrity is stronger than corporate greed." "Liar!" Finch screamed, his face turning a blotchy red. "You're lying. He paid you, didn't he? This is a conspiracy." His polished veneer of control had completely shattered, revealing the snarling, cornered animal beneath. He jabbed a finger at Caleb. "You will not destroy me with these pathetic lies." Caleb let Finch's frantic tirade fill the room, let the board see the full, unhinged panic of their leader. When the screaming finally subsided into ragged breaths, a dead silence descended. In that silence, Caleb's voice was quiet, calm, and utterly final. "It's good that you were all so vocal," he said, looking around at each board member before his eyes settled on the CEO. "I wanted to make sure your positions were perfectly clear for the record." A confused murmur rippled through the room. Caleb gestured to a small, almost invisible camera mounted discreetly on the credenza. "This entire meeting, every word you've said, has been on a secure, encrypted live stream. A team from the FBI's Healthcare Fraud Division has been watching." The blood drained from Alistair Finch's face. The rage, the defiance, the bluster, it all evaporated, replaced by the slack-jawed, hollow-eyed expression of a man who had just realized the trapdoor had swung open beneath his feet. He wasn't in a boardroom. He was at his own execution. It was over. The stunned silence in the boardroom was absolute, broken only by the frantic, whispered tones of a lawyer speaking into his phone. The board members, titans of industry and finance just moments before, now looked like shipwreck survivors, their faces pale and their authority stripped bare. Alistair Finch stood frozen, a statue of hubris, as two plain-clothed FBI agents entered the room with quiet, professional efficiency. There was no struggle, no final outburst. They simply flanked him, said his name, and led him away. The sound of the heavy doors clicking shut behind them was the definitive end of an era. With Finch gone, the board's resistance crumbled into dust. Facing the twin specters of federal prosecution and total public ruin, their capitulation was immediate and unconditional. Within the hour, an emergency vote was held. The old board was dissolved. A new interim board was formed, and by unanimous consent, Caleb Vance was appointed its new chairman. Caleb didn't savor the victory. He moved with the swift, decisive energy of a man on a mission. His first act as chairman was to call a hospital-wide senior staff meeting. In the same auditorium where Finch had once delivered self-congratulatory speeches, Caleb stood before the assembled department heads, his voice resonating with a power that came not from a title but from purpose. As of this moment, the policies of financial triage at Bridgeview are officially dead, he announced, his words echoing in the cavernous room. From this day forward, every single person who comes through our doors will be treated based on their medical need, and that need alone. Triage will be about saving lives, not about saving money. He then addressed the financial question head-on. To ensure this, I am personally establishing a $100 million endowment, effective immediately. Its sole purpose will be to cover the cost of care for any uninsured or underinsured patient. This hospital will never again turn a person away because they cannot pay. That is not a suggestion, it is a promise. A wave of shock and disbelief rippled through the audience. He wasn't finished. I have also accepted the resignations of the entire executive leadership team, he continued, the statement landing like a thunderclap. We are not here to reform the old system. We are here to build a new one from the ground up. A system based on compassion, integrity, and the fundamental belief that healthcare is a human right. His final announcement was the most symbolic. This institution needs a new name, he said, his voice softening for the first time. One that will serve as a permanent reminder of our new mission, of why we are doing this. Effective today, Bridgeview Medical Center will be known as the Lily and Leo Center for Healing. He let the name hang in the air. It was a memorial and a celebration, honoring the child who was lost to a broken system and the child who was saved from it. It was a promise that their stories, one of tragedy and one of hope, would be the bedrock of this new foundation. Later that evening, the chaos had subsided. Caleb found Leah, Leo, and their mother, Maria, in the same quiet waiting room where their alliance had begun. Leo, now fully recovered, was coloring in a book, his face a picture of innocent concentration. The oppressive fear that had once filled the space was gone, replaced by a sense of profound, exhausted relief. Caleb sat down, not as a billionaire or a chairman, but as a man who shared a unique, unbreakable bond with this family. What you did, Leah, he began, his voice thick with emotion, what you had the courage to do, you changed everything. You saved more lives than you'll ever know. Leah shook her head, a shy smile touching her lips. I just wanted them to help my brother. And in doing that, you've given thousands of other brothers and sisters and parents a chance they wouldn't have had, Caleb replied. He slid a sleek, formal-looking brochure across the table. The cover read, The Lily Vance Foundation. I've started a foundation in my daughter's name, he explained. Its primary mission will be to fund medical care and research, but it will also do something else. He tapped a section of the brochure. It will fund the education of the next generation of doctors. Doctors who believe in healing people, not processing payments. Doctors with courage and a conscience. He looked directly at Leah, his eyes filled with a paternal pride and deep respect. The foundation's first ever full medical school scholarship is already reserved. It doesn't have a name on it yet, but it's waiting for you, Leah. For whenever you're ready. Tears welled in Leah's eyes as she picked up the brochure, her fingers tracing the elegant font. A doctor. It had always been a distant, impossible dream, something for kids from a different world. Now it was a promise. A path forged from the worst moment of her life into a future she had never dared to imagine. Maria wept silently beside her, her hand covering her mouth, her heart overflowing with a gratitude too immense for words. The Lily and Leo Center is born from tragedy but built on hope and justice. Comment Hope wins, if you're tired of seeing greed triumph over compassion. Let's fill the comments with a positive force that monsters like Finch can't ignore. 10 years. A decade is long enough for scars to fade, for anger to soften, and for a revolution to become the new normal. The institution once known as Bridgeview Medical Center was now unrecognizable. The Lily and Leo Center for Healing had become a national beacon, a testament to the radical idea that a hospital's primary function was to heal, not to profit. The cold, imposing glass of the old triage desk was gone, replaced with an open, welcoming reception area. The air, once thick with anxiety and antiseptic, now held a palpable sense of calm competence and compassion. It was a place rebuilt on a foundation of hope. A confident, compassionate woman in a crisp white coat moved through the emergency department with an air of quiet authority. Her steps were purposeful, her eyes missing nothing. The flicker of a monitor, the worried expression on a patient's face, the subtle weariness in a young intern's posture. This was Dr. Leah Harris, the newly appointed chief resident of emergency medicine. The scared 16-year-old girl who had once stood helpless in this very space was gone, replaced by a leader forged in the fires of that long-ago crisis. Suddenly the automatic doors slid open with a pneumatic hiss, admitting a gust of city air and a wave of raw panic. A young mother, her face a mask of terror, rushed in, clutching a small child to her chest. The little girl was wheezing, her breath coming in short, desperate rasps, a sound Leah remembered with horrifying clarity. "Please," the mother cried out, her voice breaking. "She can't breathe. We don't have insurance, I don't know what to do, but please." Before the receptionist could even respond, Dr. Harris was there. She knelt, bringing herself to eye level with the terrified mother, her expression radiating a profound and immediate calm. She placed a gentle hand on the woman's arm, her voice steady and reassuring. "You did the right thing by coming here," Leah said. "We're going to take care of her. Right now, nothing else matters." She then spoke the words that had become the hospital's unbreakable creed, the very heart of its mission. "Don't worry about the cost. We're here to help." A team of nurses was already moving, their actions a symphony of practiced efficiency. They took the child, not with the cold detachment of the past, but with a gentle urgency that communicated both competence and care. As Leah led the way toward a treatment room, she guided the mother past a simple, elegant plaque mounted on the main wall. It held 2 smiling photographs. One was of a little girl with a gap-toothed grin, Lily Vance. The other was of a 5-year-old boy with a mop of dark curls, Leo Harris. Beneath their images, the inscription was simple and powerful. One was lost. One was saved. Their stories healed a system. The mother, glancing at the plaque, seemed to understand. She was not a liability to be managed. She was a person to be cared for. Her child was not an unprofitable encounter. She was a patient who would receive the best medicine had to offer, without qualification or hesitation. Inside the treatment room, Dr. Harris worked swiftly, her commands clear and precise, her touch gentle as she examined the little girl. The cycle was complete. The desperate plea for help that had once echoed off a cold wall of indifference had been answered, not just for one child, but for all who would ever pass through these doors. The war had been won long ago, but here, in the quiet, focused moments of saving a life, was the lasting peace. Justice wasn't just a verdict delivered in a boardroom, it was this. A child breathing easier. A mother's terror giving way to hope. A legacy of compassion written one patient at a time.